Noah Redler is the founder of Arche Innovation, which works with local governments and stakeholders to design, structure, and implement innovation ecosystems that support digital economies. That sounds like a bit of a mouthful. So what they actually do is partner with companies and organizations, including the Canadian Space Agency, McGill University, the Government of Quebec, Centec, and the CBC, to work on innovative solutions to problems ranging from employment for linguistic minorities to digital governments, intelligent infrastructure, and the creation of tech accelerators and incubators. You might recognize Noah as the former director of Montreal's Notman House or the VP of Communications and Government Relations for Gestion Immobilier Quo Vadis. He was also a political attaché at the City of Montreal, campaign manager for 5 elections at all levels of government, communications coordinator for Canada World Youth, and logistics and hospitality manager at Just for Laughs. When I was covering tech more as a journalist, I'd run into him all the time at pitch nights, C2, startup fests, and other entrepreneurship events. We also spent a few weekends with a bunch of Montreal entrepreneurs for the Tournée des Entrepreneurs years ago, which he co-founded, where small groups of successful Montreal entrepreneurs drove to rural areas of Quebec for discussions and networking with entrepreneurs there. I got to tag along as a caterer, though this experience was a big part of what inspired me to launch my own app, Fork That, a few years later. So when I invited him on this podcast, I didn't know he'd previously co-hosted a podcast himself. And if he weren't so busy, I'd probably think about inviting him to be a co-host of this one, because he certainly has his fingers in a lot of pots and is a very intelligent person. Here's Noah Redler. Hi, Noah. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, Amie, it's great to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Actually, I'm not sure what was the last thing we ran into each other at, event-wise.
That is a very good question. Everything pre-2020 is just one big mesh in my memory right now.
Yeah, everything pre-COVID, I bet.
But it must have been out there somewhere. I remember there was a night at Agricole.
Oh yeah, that was fun. We've talked about actually Agricole with different guests on this podcast before. I feel like I'm doing wonderful marketing for them. So
hopefully they become a sponsor one day.
Yeah, that will be the next step. So speaking actually of Agricole, speaking of good drinking, because that's what I think of when I think of Agricole, they have wonderful cocktails. What are you drinking today for the 5 à 7 podcast?
Well, I'm a little behind schedule today, so I hope you don't mind. I have to kind of make my my cocktail as we chat. Is that all right?
That's perfect. I love it, especially if it's complicated.
It's not complicated, but it's, for me, it's that perfectly simple cocktail. It's the classic martini.
Okay.
So I actually, believe it or not, got back into these during COVID because I saw the actor Stanley Tucci make one on the internet. And I was so amazed and so, I guess, inspired by his cool making of the martini that I wanted to replicate. So here we go. So we got our martini glass, and step number 1 is you fill it with ice, because you want that glass nice and cool day like this. And I've already set this all up. I got my little ice bucket here. And we're going to take that over here, put it just aside for a second as it chills and gets cool. Then I have my martini shaker, of course. Although you don't actually shake a martini in reality.
James Bond was so wrong. I know, I've heard this. I'm excited to hear the official reason here. Why do you not shake it?
The reason you don't shake it is because you don't want the ice to break off and into the cocktail and water down your martini. Okay. And so the whole joke with James Bond is that he's kind of ordering a watered down martini and being a little snooty about it.
Well, come on, if you had to save the world, you wouldn't want to be that drunk, right? Maybe just like a little tipsy?
Honestly, there was a little level of respect that he was able to do it that drunk, but you know what? I don't blame him at the end of the day. I'll take the world over a little bit of cocktail protocol. So then we're gonna take our gin. It's I should have gotten a local gin. I didn't think of that, but I use the Botanist. It's a small cask gin, and we do have a lot of good local gins here in Montreal.
I'm not a gin aficionado, but what's the advantage of the Botanist for you? What makes it a great martini?
It has a little bit of that floral flavor, but also it doesn't have much of an aftertaste as a gin for me, and so it just kind of blends well. We're gonna do 2 shots and a bit of gin, so it'll be a happy 5 à 7.
Okay.
We'll be a little tipsy on our Thursday night, but it's kind of like old times with Thursday nights just before it starts.
Well, I like the martini in that you have one, and that'll get you nice and tipsy. It's not like a really weak, and especially not a watered down drink, like you said.
Exactly. And so I've had a few nights where I've had 2 or 3 of those,
Oh
and
boy.
those were special nights, but
Ugh.
we're gonna keep it a little bit more sage this time. So now we have a little bit of vermouth. We're gonna put that right in there, just a little drop, and let it. And I'm just gonna leave it there for a minute, let it get nice and cold.
Okay, dry vermouth, not sweet vermouth, right? Because that's a different kind of
Exactly.
martini.
It's a very different kind of martini, and you have to be very careful in Europe because even if you explain to them you want an American style martini, that's not what you're going to get. And
Oh yeah.
you get the red martini cocktail thing that they make, and when you question them on it, they look at you like you're a psychopath because clearly that's not right.
Oh wow.
And yeah,
I would think
so
the stereotype would be that North Americans want it sweeter, which is what the red would be. But it's the
but it,
opposite. The
complete
Europeans like
opposite.
it with red and sweeter. I wonder if it's French versus Italian, like white vermouth versus red vermouth.
Something to look up a little bit later. So now we're gonna empty out our glass. Make sure we get all the little water out there. It's a hot day. And sometimes you do it with olives, but I'm going with lemon today because it's a hot day.
Okay.
And lemon goes well. And we're gonna rim the edge. Just nice, so I get that little lemon flavor.
Okay.
And gonna try to squeeze a little zest in there. I actually can't find my, I was supposed to bring my fancy spoon, you know, the long fancy spoon to twirl with.
Yeah.
But I seem to have forgotten it. I'm not gonna abandon you here while right here. So we're gonna cheat a little bit and just gonna shake it up nice and light.
Very gently, not
Very
James Bond style.
No James Bond, because that would be a full shake and, you know, then I'd just be a hypocrite. And we're gonna pour that in there right there and fill up the glass a little tall because you don't want to get thirsty in the middle of a conversation.
Heavens no, that would be awful.
It would be awful, actually. And voila, I'm ready to cheers with you.
Great. Well, I have mine pre-prepared. It is not as beautifully concocted as yours, but santé.
Santé. Nonetheless, a good-looking martini. That's
Not
perfect.
bad. Not bad. Okay, so now we can talk business, which I'm sure you're sick of talking because you talk business all day, every day, but maybe.
But I rarely do it with a drink in hand, so we'll give it a go.
Maybe a little bit better. Okay, so I've explained a little bit about Arche Innovation. You work with a lot of larger corporations, but you also end up working with a lot of small and medium businesses. And so what I'm curious about right now is, with all the variety of businesses that you're working with at the moment, what are you hearing about how they're doing now in terms of kind of moving online and in terms of kind of fear about the future? What's kind of the general feeling, and does it differ by size?
Well, I mean, I guess it differs mostly by industry and sector. You know, as you've probably seen, there are some industries, like even if we talk a lot about the frontline services, but there's the healthcare side, but then there's the grocery market, there's the pharmacy side. And at the end of the day, these are essential services. We all have to eat. We all have access to food. You know, I get my loofah basket delivered to me every week, and that pretty much does the job. But, you know, that can't happen for everybody. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that these are businesses. And these businesses are having an overwhelming demand for their product, and they're flourishing in this time. Zoom is exploding. Netflix is exploding. All the streaming sites are exploding right now. You know, more people are generating online content and finding ways to resell their products in a different way. So I think that there are some people that are really getting the upside of this. And a lot of that is in the tech field, where if you have any kind of solution that can relate to immediate problems, people are knocking on your doors, people are asking for your help.
Yeah.
Then there's the obvious side. I mean, a world you know very well, which is everything restaurants, local entertainment, all related to tourism industry, all related to us being able to go out. You know, there's no cure for that. You know, these are places that their entire mentality is based, their entire business model is based on how many people can I get into my space physically per night. And you know, when you have to change that thinking right away, is your marketing set up for it? Is your distribution set up for it? Who are your collaborators? And so everybody's rushing to adapt. And we saw some restaurants that adapted quickly. They have their home delivery package options, order off the menu, it'll come pre-made for you. Yeah. And then there's the other ones who they either weren't ready for it, or they weren't able to put together that kind of system where they got enough traction for home delivery. and they're really suffering.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of that world, and it's also a chicken and the egg. If you're going to invest in having your staff cooking, your chefs cooking, you need people to buy that food. Otherwise, you're just investing in more things that may not get circulated, and that's a huge problem right now.
Yeah. And what about you at Arche, for example? Because what you do, I find very interesting in this particular situation, because you're using innovation with various partners in different ways. And I know that you have a webinar up right now about shifting your business more online and making that transition. So I'm wondering, how did you manage that transition within Arche, within your own company? And was it as easy and kind of comprehensive and practical as you make it seem in the webinar?
Well, for us, the reason we made that webinar is because for us, it wasn't a transformation. That's who we are. You know, that's our daily lives. Arche, we are just decentralized organization. We're built on the idea that there is no such thing as work-life balance. There's just life, and we fit our life into work is a part of that life. Our personal life is a part of that life. And we have 24 hours a day, and we have the tools to be efficient 24 hours a day. So we use them appropriately. Mm-hmm. For years, we've been an objective-oriented organization. I don't track hours of my employees because it's a huge waste of my time. And I really just make sure that everybody finds their happy place, like in their work. Right. Because realistically, when you think about it, everybody finds their peak level of efficiency at different times of the day. I'm an early bird. I'm at my best between 6 and 9 a.m. You know, I'll finish all my work in that amount of time, and that'll give me time throughout the day. But, you know, get me after 8 p.m. and try to get me like at a high level discussion, and it's not going to go as well. Like, you know, I slowly fade. So we were there already.
And what about with the transition? Can you give me some examples of the companies you're working with right now and how they've made that transition, either after COVID happened or before? And what kind of changes, what other kinds of changes are they making?
Well, everyone's obviously had to adjust to being decentralized. Right now we're working with the incubator Zoo, which is the Loon Rouge incubator. It's a creativity incubator, and they were just about to launch their new cohorts when COVID happened.
Oh, so did it go ahead or no?
It did go ahead. Okay. Like they within 2 weeks, we worked with them to completely virtualize the platform. You know, their team and our team going a little bit crazy at it and testing different solutions, finding the right mechanism. And they were able to transform it, and they're just coming to the end of the cohort in a couple of weeks, and it worked. You know, there's mentor meetings with over Zoom. There's different webinars on different learning subjects. There's coaching periods, but it translated pretty well. Okay. And I think that's why it was what everybody's like needs to like appreciate during all this is that if here in Canada at least, or like in most parts of Canada, the United States, Europe, parts of Asia, we transitioned immediately. Like overnight, we were okay. Well, let's figure this out. But we all had a laptop, we all had a smartphone, and so Zoom accounts were opening up, and everybody was signing up to Microsoft 365 and Google Drive. And think about this really, Amy. I mean, this is the first time in history where not only do we have the technology to be completely efficient and have this little chat of me sitting at home and you sitting at home, and share it with the world and communicate and have fun and enjoy ourselves to a certain degree. Never before in history have we been able to do that so effectively and efficiently with the tools we already have in our hands.
Right.
And that, like, people came to the realization very quickly that this isn't so hard and this is a beautiful thing. And so, like, with the people we're working with, what they suddenly realize is that, wow, this is the world we've been resisting, but now we want more of it and we're hungry for transformation.
Right. I love your optimism because you put such a positive spin on it. And I know it's not a positive or easy transition for a lot of people, and especially not an easy transition for a lot of people. But I'm wondering what other factors are involved. Like you gave a couple examples with the incubator, for example. You're not working directly with those startups. So I'm sure those startups within the incubator had a variety of issues. What are you hearing from startups? I know you're working with, say, Living Lab, La Naudière, and what are small businesses saying?
Well, I mean, the small businesses and startups, obviously, depending at what stage you are, this is a difficult time. Like I said before, depending on what industry you're in, it's a difficult time. Anything to do with mobility, like you think of startups were known, like that Montreal is known for Bus Bud and, you know, breather rooms and different things like that. It's like, well,
what do you do?
But assuming they're having a rough month. And that's totally understandable. It's not like not at all their fault. But startups are, I think, in a decent place right now because most of them were not revenue generators to begin with. So these are companies that, they had more of a focused time. They had more people's attention. They were able to get access to people because we were all at home. And there were dozens of initiatives designed to help them. Bonjour Startup Montréal, Montréal Inc. We work with the Living Lab Lanaudière project up in the Lanaudière region, obviously. And there's so much more time for for startups to work with small businesses and really take the time to integrate and develop their projects together. So if you were a startup not making any money before, well, not much change in your day-to-day.
You're still a startup, not making very much money right now.
It's still developing. Like you keep going. And I commend the incubators in Quebec. They really did go above and beyond adapting to them and keeping services going. It's pretty cool. So maybe some of them had to slow down or change their plans. But I've seen a lot of them do a quick pivot during this time. A company, Intelligence Industrielle, who has a manufacturing 4.0 solution, suddenly started working with retail shops to help them and IGA Online to help them manage waiting times and give a dashboard to give more information to consumers.
Right, because who isn't frustrated with that? But we're willing to wait if we know how long it's going to be.
Exactly, and information is just calms everybody down. And so this got integrated very quickly. It wasn't a market they thought of. It wasn't something they were interested in. But but now it became an opportunity. There's another startup that got some media recently called Zootbox. And the perfect example of taking advantage of the situation, in a good way, they created an app courier service. They'll come pick up something at my house and deliver it to you. And it's a one day, within a few hours, they'll go from A to B. I pay online with my credit card. And that's perfect.
And that's for anything? That could be any kind of shipment?
Pretty much anything that doesn't require a major truck, like anything you can hold in your hands.
Okay, because I saw this post on Facebook. I don't even know who it was, honestly, but it was someone, her ex-boyfriend had moved out but left a bunch of his stuff there, and she had to get it to him in the US somehow, and she was wondering if it was legal to ship it with a ride share because it was going to cost her like $400 or something to ship otherwise. So shipping and logistics like that whole supply chain and just individual the destination or location to destination for anybody is so messed up right now, I feel. So what kind of innovation are you seeing in those industries?
Honestly, it's the innovation you would exactly expect. Simplifying transport, simplifying transactions.
And that's what works so well with Zootbox, I guess.
But of course, I mean, if everything people are forgetting, and we're getting overwhelmed with technology and all these things, but break it down to the fundamentals. We have to get our products and services and deliver them to our clients. Think about what I do right now. I'm a consulting firm and we write a lot of papers. We provide a lot of advice. I need to be able to do two things. I need to be able to communicate often with my clients, and I need to be able to share documents with them and send them information. Today, no problem. Go back to 1990, I would have to print it out and find someone and figure out a way to mail it to them, and I wouldn't be able to physically go.
You'd be pulling your beard out.
I'd be pulling. Oh yeah, the hair is good. I'd be beardless. But that's what everything comes down to. How do I get my products and services to the client? We were talking about the restaurants that adapted and started to deliver. How do I get my products to the client? Answer that question, and you could figure out a way to survive.
Yeah. One more thing before we get into food. Well, while we're talking about kind of those, the technology that we didn't have before, when I think of rural areas that maybe don't have as much access to tech infrastructure that we have in major urban centers, is there a big difference between the kind of hiccups they're having because of COVID there? And then because I know you are working internationally in Côte d'Ivoire, I think, how is innovation and how are people adapting there versus North America? So let's start with rural and then let's talk international.
So rural, I mean, depending on where you are, it's been a bit of a challenge. We work in the Lanaudière region with the Living Lab project. And my colleague who I work with on the project, Noemi, She lives in a little village called Saint Thomas. The internet is not great, and so when we have to have video chats, sometimes it's spotty. Sometimes she has to turn off the video to be able to get a connection, but she makes it work. Maybe she has to go to the office. Maybe she has to go take a call from her cell phone in the car somewhere. But she adapted. She figured out a solution, and everything was fine. And we interact with her, every day of the week. So somehow we figured it out. And that was exactly it. It wasn't complicated at all.
What is your project there? Maybe you can do a little background for us.
Sure, absolutely. So the Living Lab Lanaudière project is a project we've been developing with La Coopération de Développement Économique de la MRC de Joliette, CEDEJ, for the past 2 years. And, it's one of those, so as part of what we do at Arche is we do transformational programs. We know that we know that for Quebec to stay competitive, we know that for Quebec to come into the 21st century and figure out a way to make technology a part of our lives is a priority in a global market.
Especially when it comes, sorry to cut you off. I loved your example of squash. So I just wanted you to talk about squash while you're talking about the Living Lab.
Well, but it's perfectly, we work with a squash farm called La Courgerie, and a great little farm. They do agro-tourism. They make over 300 varieties of squash. And, a part of what is concerning them more immediately is that the agro-tourism in the fall, figuring out a way to make a contactless environment where people can still come visit the farm and pick up their own squash and learn a little bit about growing squashes on a farm. So we actually have connected them with a small startup called My Smart Journey, which is with MT Lab here in Montreal. And now they're building a contactless education experience on the farm so that people can go with their families and tap their phones on a little icon or take a photo of a QR code and learn about the squash, get some recipes, make it at home, and fill up their basket with their products, and then just pick it up at the end and go. And so they get to go visit the farm still, but it's a reinvented experience.
Right.
But something else she was interested in is that because she was telling us a lot in the early days that her farm has changed a lot because of climate change. Her and her family know squashes inside and out, and they understood the cycles of farming, everything, but the soil started to change and the weather patterns started to change. And so the growing cycle started to change. So she's also interested in having underground sensors to better calculate what's the condition of the soil, where to plant what variety of squash. And, this is a thought because it's all about producing better quality and, having more stock to give to grocery stores or sell elsewhere. It comes back to the same idea. How do I operate my business more efficiently? And if you look in Europe, they're leaders in this. Intelligent agriculture, new ways of growing food. If you look at a lot of emerging trends in urban agriculture, I mentioned Lufa before, but that's a big thing. And Lufa is a pretty innovative firm.
If anybody doesn't know what Lufa is, it's basically greenhouses that are supplying, I don't remember what percentage of Montreal right now, but I read a percentage and it was surprising. Okay, so Côte d'Ivoire, what is your project in Abidjan exactly? And how is that different in Africa? You mentioned Europe, so what about Africa?
So I was actually in Abidjan the week of March 11th when COVID happened, when it became a global pandemic.
Oh, wow. And you had to rush home, I guess?
We literally had to rush home. We were planning on staying there for a little while, but all of a sudden everybody was talking about borders closing. Our layover was in Morocco and Casablanca, and we were getting notices that Morocco, was shutting down all travel in and out.
Oh, gosh.
So we immediately decided, okay, we're leaving at the end of the week, and we got out of there as quickly as possible. And we were actually literally on the last flight out of Casablanca before they closed the borders.
Oh,
and
wow.
Then, unfortunately, quite a few Canadians got stuck there for about over a week before any travel came back. But I think one of the things that's happening in Côte d'Ivoire and different parts of Africa right now is that it is in a complete development stage. They have their 2067 goals to build infrastructures. They announced recently the oceanic wire internet cable that's going to go around the continent, giving high-speed access to all points of the continent. So, maybe some people don't realize it, but you actually get pretty decent 4G, 3G, and internet connections in major cities like Abidjan now. So we're working with a local government organization called Agence PME Côte d'Ivoire, and they want to build a first cluster for the tech innovation community. So we're helping them design a strategy, how to implement that in the local reality, how to create an entire economy based on technology services. And although there's a lot of action going on there, it's very informal right now. So we're working with them on ways to formalize it. But that's one of the, honestly, that's one of the things that's the most painful about this, because Arche, have been looking to set up an office in Côte d'Ivoire for the past 3 years. This has been a long-term thinking project that we want to be there. And this was our project, that was going to allow me to travel there 3-4 times this year, spend a little bit more time, maybe set up a first office, build up a few more projects, and maybe hire our first staff. And all of a sudden, on my trip home, I realized that's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Yeah. But at the same time, probably business there can go ahead. I mean, similarly to how it's going ahead here, to whatever extent, because they do have access to internet. And given if this had happened, 50 years ago, or not even 50 years ago, I'm sure.
10 years ago.
Yeah, this might be a very different situation there.
Oh, we wouldn't have been able to continue the mandates. Now we're still working with them. We're talking on WhatsApp every other day, so we keep in touch. And that's it. Like, we can send documents via internet, and so we can easily exchange information. But the reality is, it wasn't hit that hard in Côte d'Ivoire. And even while I was down there, I remember when they announced the pandemic, that it was an official pandemic. The WHO announced the pandemic status. Overnight, every door I walked in, there was hand sanitizer waiting for me, and everybody had a mask immediately. And I was extremely impressed by how quickly they put in safety measures. But one of the things people have been talking about, that Africa is going to be the next to be hit hard by this. But I've been talking to my friends down there, and we all seem to agree that it's already been hit, but nobody noticed. And the reason is because the major metropolitan areas, and this is a demographic question, there's a popular demographic stat that the African continent has 60% of its population under the age of 40. And so and most of the senior population live outside of major cities. They live in small villages, away from much circulation or traffic. And so you have a population of young, healthy, energetic people that are just going through their day. Hot temperature that's, makes it obviously a little bit easier. So there's some projections that say that probably mostly around 75% of the population already has it, but they're just naturally getting better. And because they're young and because they have good immune systems, there's good immune systems among young people. They're just gonna leapfrog this.
Oh, interesting.
And really hope that's true. I really hope it for my friends, but that's what seems to be their takeaway of it. That we're going to create that natural herd immunity without herd immunity here, and it'll just be luckily because our population is young.
Right. Well, I hope you get back there sooner rather than later. I'm also just, what food do you miss? That's what I'm curious about. What do you do?
In the Ivory Coast?
Yeah.
It's a bit classic, but there almost any restaurant you go there's a poulet and poisson grillé. And
so grilled chicken and fish.
Grilled chicken and fish is their classic recipe. Like, there's spices. It's very similar everywhere you go, but it's amazing. And they have these little mackies there, which are essentially the equivalent of street food here. And you go in and it's like nothing you've ever tasted. It's like nothing you've ever tasted. There's like this amazing, delicious chicken, and I miss it so much.
Is it the chicken itself? Do you think it's a different kind of chicken, or is it the spices, or is it just kind of like the romance of being there?
No, it's definitely the spices and the way they cook it, because you get the same experience in almost every restaurant.
Okay.
And there's this local, even when I go eat at friends' houses, it's pretty similar. So there's a local recipe that kind of, that kind of gets around, kind of like eating a foie gras or bavette in Paris. And it's exceptional. I mean, it is such good food.
Oh, I'm sorry you miss it. So then let's transition nicely into the food questions. What have you been eating here? Have you tried to recreate your Côte d'Ivoire chicken or fish since you've been home?
I'm not that confident. No,
Okay.
I feel like there's something to it as kind of oven. A knowledge that's shared from generation to generation that I'm not connected to, but not that ambitious, but I have been cooking a lot actually.
Okay. What have you been making?
So this week it's been a transition to seafood. I've started to make. Last night it was mussels. It is actually the first time I've ever made mussels at home, and
it went well. I hope
it went perfectly well. And it's one of those things where, as I'm doing it, it's like, this is so fast. This is so easy. Why don't I do this more often? And then I look at this pile of shells that's waiting out, like in my after eating it all. I was like, oh yeah, because what do I do with all these shells now?
You do not make art with it. That is what I learned on my last birthday. You do not get a glue gun and you put it together and then you leave the art in your home somewhere. That is actually very dangerous, it turns out. It gives off kind of, no, like scientifically, it gives off some kind of toxin or poison or something in the air, and you can actually hurt yourself if you leave art. And the art itself was very fun, and maybe you should make it, but then you should compost it.
So can I tell you a little story? Like I was,
please.
2 summers ago, I was in Les Îles de la Madeleine, and I was hanging out on a beach, and for some reason or not, there was a lot of crab and empty oyster shells that had dried out on the beach. And I was so bored on the beach that I started making little sculptures out of them, and I made a whole Lord of the Flies rendition of like out of clamshells, and I captured it all. I hope deep down I hope it's still there and somebody just preserved it for me.
I bet it was so beautiful that somebody thought, oh, that's a work of art, must take this.
I actually used some shells to write the word art next to it, so there was no confusion.
Good move. So while we're talking about food and drink things, let's move into a little lightning round and keep things really quickly.
All right, hold on. I gotta set up for this.
All right.
I'll be ready.
Yeah, take a good sip.
Okay.
Okay, so first thing that comes to mind: sweet or spicy?
Sweet.
What's your comfort food?
Hamburger.
What did you make for dinner last night? That was the mussels, right?
That was mussels, yeah.
What are you making for dinner tonight?
Barbecue chicken.
Last cooking fail.
Last cooking fail. Believe it or not, it was a steak. I don't know what I did, but I was barbecuing it, and something went wrong. Something went very, very wrong.
Oh boy. What have you been eating too much of lately?
Meat.
In general, even though you're a loofahvore. Interesting.
I am a loofahvore, but there's meat on the loofah marketplace, and so they're tempting me with local products.
And they have a minimum order, so meat makes it easy to.
Exactly. You understand me.
I do. I have a friend that is a devotee. Fun fact, I used to write recipes for loofah when they first launched, and people didn't know what to do with eggplant. I wrote a lot of eggplant recipes.
Fun fact, loofah was one of my first clients.
There you go.
There you
go. What are you craving right now?
Ribs.
Yeah, I understand that.
There's ribs, but also there's another craving, but I've solved it already. It's lobster, and it's coming tomorrow.
From where?
From Noref.
Oh, good. And so they deliver too. Oh, that's good to know. La Mer delivers too. That's my usual go-to place. And Noref and La Mer and Odessa are kind of the major players in seafood, I guess, in Montreal.
So you want to know the food thing that's changed dramatically during COVID? I have a supplier for everything. I've got a wine importer. I've got a lobster supplier. Anything I'm looking for, I got a guy.
Okay. Who's your wine importer? You become one of those people? Yeah, who has a guy?
His name's Charlie. He does a lot of wine importation for restaurants, and he got connected to me through a friend of mine, and I just got a case of wine from him, and it's fantastic.
What's his company name?
What's that?
What's his company name? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but I could send you the information. You can get some nice wines delivered.
Great. And so a lot of Italian wine, you said. Oh, and he delivers. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Italian wines. What are you drinking lately?
Chiantis.
Aha. Classic reds, full-bodied. Okay. Classic. Yeah.
Exactly. This is the peasant wine,
Was before it was eyebrow.
It's like lobster used to be like a food that was appreciated more by like people in lower income statuses, then became a delicacy. Chianti, the same thing. And it's like I'm gonna have a lobster Chianti mixed together just to like respect the old traditions. Right.
Let's believe that. What's your desert island COVID meal? Appetizer, main, and dessert, if you can. If you have a last dinner, it could be anything.
If I could have in desert island anything.
Yeah. You didn't have to make it yourself. Someone would make it for you, whatever.
So my appetizer would be grilled octopus.
Oh, okay. Is there a place, like a style, or where is this inspiration coming from?
It's coming from La Sala Rosa.
Oh, that is such a good grilled octopus. Or it was when Jeremiah was there. I don't know what's going on now. Is it still wonderful?
I don't know. It's been a while. So,
okay. Because Jeremiah Bullied was doing it there. Oh, the classic one originally.
Jeremiah Bullied was doing it?
Yeah. So there was La Sala Rosa, like that was like the old school Spanish restaurant, which was super affordable. They had those wonderful sherry mushrooms, and they had, you know, really good octopus, and it was just so delicious with your wine. And then Jeremiah Bullied, who's now at Point Carré Cantine, or Chinatown, sorry, took over, and then that team left. That was like a young kind of hip team, and now I don't know what's going on there. We'll have to check it out. Okay, so appetizer, octopus, got it.
Then I know it doesn't go well with it, but I'd be remiss if I didn't end it all with a good burger and fries.
Okay. From where or?
My own.
Yours. Okay.
My burger, like thick, you know, extra spice burger that doesn't make economical sense in a restaurant. That's the burger I want. Okay. But French fries, French fries, where would I get them from? It's a tough question. Where's your favorite French fry in Montreal, Amie?
I really like Touquet or Brasserie Thé, because they have the skinny ones and they're nicely salted, but they're still crispy enough.
I like that answer. All right, I'm going to go with those fries. I'll steal that from you.
And then dessert?
Dessert. So essentially what I would like, so I have a dairy allergy, just so to put this into context, I would like a nice vegan chocolate chip cookie with a scoop of mint chocolate chip ice cream on top. Just
so you know, if it's like a desert island last thing, you can have whatever you want, and the dairy allergy is not going to be an issue. But I like your devotion to vegan and chocolate, so
I like to be precautious there.
Yeah, just in case. Yeah. You know,
like, you know, I take my last meal, like, oh, this is the end for me, and then a cruise liner pulls up, is like, hey, everybody, mumbo.
And then you're not in the mood for dancing. Got it. Yeah. Okay, so let's move into the business side of the lightning round. What's the best way to spend, well, I guess it doesn't have to be. What's the best way to spend $1 million in 10 minutes?
$1 million in 10 minutes?
Yep.
This is like a Brewsters Millions question. $1 million in 10 minutes. What's the best way to do it?
Yep. Are you going to put it towards a startup? Are you going to buy a big meal? Are you going to donate to charity? I don't need to give you options. I'm just kind of
where did I get the money?
It doesn't matter. It's legit.
It's legit. Okay. It's legit cash. I would organize a massive breakfast buffet, and I would just first come, first serve until all the food's gone. I would just like have a trough of breakfast buffet going until as many people ate as possible.
That's cool. I like that one.
Can I tell you that that's one thing I'm going to miss in the future? Breakfast buffets, because I feel like they're not coming back.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things.
Not in the way that we think of them now, for sure.
Yeah, I guess not.
Yeah. I wonder what will happen. Maybe in a year or two, maybe we'll have a breakfast buffet again.
I'll be there the first one.
Okay. What's the business you wish you'd invested in before COVID happened?
The business I wish I had invested in before COVID happened? I should say Zoom, but that's probably not it. Honestly, the thing that I wish I invested more in, and that I think is going to be the next good thing, is more human virtual reality.
Okay.
So, you know, it's funny, like we were talking about technology before, and as much as we talk about technology and how easy it was to go decentralized and how remote work is going to work, the number one question I get these days is how to make our remote work culture more human. How do we replicate in like this connection that we have? How do we get that thing that you can only get when you're in a room with people, and there's no other way to replicate it? That's a good question. I think a lot of it is going to be answered by virtual environments in the short term, but a lot of hardware to go. It's not going to be just a virtual headset. You're going to have a lot of tactile hardware attached to you at the same time.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the issue. Is like everybody needs to have this hardware, so there's a lot of onboarding. It's not going to be an immediate thing, but what an advantage that would be if you could create an environment where people can collaborate more easily, where you don't feel isolated at home, where you don't feel like you're being limited by whatever your situation is, wherever you are. Like that's an incredible concept. Like think about all the people right now that are dealing with anxiety and dealing with, being stuck at home with either people they don't like or people that, or no people at all. So that's really insightful. That would be interesting. What do you know, like VR companies right now, what kind of development is happening?
I know there's a lot of developments around virtual environments. So the virtual shopping mall, the virtual conference, the virtual concert, all of those are in full development. Facebook's going to announce its VR world probably late this year, early next year. But I'm also seeing a lot of pretty like amazing things that related to mental health. A lot of the credible things around recreating human compassion and empathy. I mean, one of these fundamental questions that, you have to really think about, and you think about how to replicate is, how do you create a virtual hug? And it's a really hard question because there's so much more to it than just, the sense of being held. There's something about it when you're being hugged or when you feel someone's hand, like when you have a human contact with someone, there's nothing that quite replicates this. But if I could in some way reach out and hug you virtually, and you had a shirt, sensor, a few armbands that kind of gave you a sensation of being hugged, could that respond to a lot of things? And, that's, when I talk to my team about thinking about future virtual environments, because we're thinking about it a lot right now, that's, the base question I ask, like, whenever you think about what it's going to look like, ask yourself how you hug somebody in that environment. And if we can't answer that question, then we're not quite grasping the problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think a lot of people, when they haven't experienced a lot of virtual reality, and we're fortunate in Montreal, or at least we were fortunate with places like the Phi Center, which I'm sure is an interesting company. You'd see how they're, whatever kind of transition they're doing. People have an idea, if they haven't experienced a lot of it, that it will be like Star Trek style, like holograms, and you enter a room and it's a completely different kind of reality. And the fact is that often you're putting on a headset, and depending on the quality of the headset and the quality of the visuals, it could be believable or not. So I think like the hug idea is fascinating, but what's the timeline on that? When are we going to have that? We have the sensors now, but you have to have those sensors and they have to be highly receptive.
So I'm going to give you a glimpse into the future here, Amie. And like, this is as obvious as this sounds. This is a fundamental change in the way we are. The future is people being multidisciplinary. And, it's like, okay, well, I'm good at more than one thing. Like, all right, that's logical, but that's not how we're made. That's not how we grow up. We grow up and we specialize in things, and we like become good at certain things, and we focus our attention on different things. But the future of answers is, the reality is going to come from a multitude of different ways of thinking and multiple different sources. At Arche, what I always tell my team is, like, we are not an innovation company. We are a sociology company. We're a psychology company. We're an anthropology company. We're a transformation company. But innovation is the way we get it done. That's the side effect. There was a study done about open workspaces, and said that the majority of open workspaces were demonstrated as being absolute failures, reduction in productivity. These were horrible concepts, and like, it pretty much crashed on the entire concept. But the reality is that people thought that the open spaces in itself was a solution. And it never really went to change the culture of its organization to live in an open space environment, to exchange ideas more freely, to promote open education within an environment. Because we have it all at our access, at our fingertips. We were talking about access to, the equipment to communicate, but we have the world at our fingers. We can learn to do anything. And that's where a lot of the startup world and the startup culture comes from, is that even if you're not a specialist in it, you can become one. I mean, I never went to innovation school. I got involved in the innovation community. I worked with startups. I studied on my own for 10 years, read every book I could find, and I know what I know and I don't know what I don't know. But at the end of the day is like, I needed to, like, what I realized very quickly is that if I want to work in what I do, I have to learn about human psychology. What are the factors of resistance? I have to learn about technology. I have to learn about technology, every level of it. What's possible, what's real, what's not. I have to learn about the human, like I have to learn about the human psyche. I have to really figure out what makes people resist change and what makes them want change. And these are hard questions, but none of them come from a single field. And the more and more I go around, the more I realize is that most people can only look at things through the lens that they have. And having a broader lens and really understanding how to see it from different perspectives, it's hard. It really is hard to like be able to open up your mind like that. But the future is multidisciplinary. And to really kind of close up on what we're saying, the reason is because VR will need to be connected with neurotechnology, which will need to be connected with human biology, different kind of synapses patterns. It's going to have to be thought about in a health way. Like what are the health concerns of virtual reality? We're going to have to fit all these questions into it because there are actual concerns of people getting lost in virtual environments and not realizing which environment it is. So the thing is, we are getting to the holodeck scenario where we'll be able to enter such immersive scenarios with 3D sound and odor development through virtual. You know, there's a company called Audible Reality that does 3D sound as if you're in a park and you can hear all the sounds around you. There's a company called Deja Vu that creates smells in virtual and can create smells in virtual environments. What happens when we can have full sensory appreciation in a virtual world? Do we know the difference? Is it clear where the line is? And, you know, there's a group I sat with like thinking about this, and we actually came up with the idea that virtual reality needs a virtual concierge. You know, somebody that comes up, like kind of like Netflix, that stops and says, hey, you've been watching for a few hours. Are you still watching? Someone to come in is like, oh, by the way, you're not in the real world right now. It's time to unplug and go back to your life.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about a hug, I think that's particularly relevant because if it's coming from a real person and it's, you know, someone that you're talking with and you're kind of feeling that person through the sensors, that's one thing. But if you're in a virtual reality and it's not a real person hugging you, is it a hug in the same way?
If it feels like a hug and you think it's a hug, is it a hug?
Does it comfort you like hugging a friend would, or even a stranger? Yeah.
No, but I mean, like, to think about it, like, I don't want to get into the subject, but like to think about it is like eventually, like, there will be virtual reality sex and and like there will be companionship robots
and dinners and meals and yeah. Could you taste that? Would you experience that the same way? I wonder.
Maybe eventually we can get, like, we could get that sophisticated, and the more we can manipulate our neurons and the more we can send signals directly to the brain, the more we can stimulate taste and sight and feeling.
Well, I appreciate how excited you get about all of this because so many people really do look at the downside of all these transitions. So I want to end by just asking you, well, you've talked about what you think, you know, the VR will, what effect that will have on the future of business. But what else is the world going to look like? What else are we going to have to get used to, especially in larger organizations that have so much trouble right now, that are having so much trouble right now?
Honestly, I think people forget that we're still in crisis management mode. Just because we're coming out of confinement and, you know, we're going back into not shopping malls, but we're getting allowed to like shop in stores and there's limited experiences available, it doesn't mean that anything has really changed. And especially for organizations that are going through this, they're reinventing themselves on the fly right now. And you know, I can understand that, but at the same time, people have to keep in mind that one way or the other, this will come to an end, and we will. And the question is, what will the world look like after that? I honestly think in the short term, it won't be that different. But I think we're going to really start accelerating towards how we create a world where, you know, people can operate fluidly, whether they're in an office and they're not. I honestly think the one thing that'll mostly change is real estate. That will be an industry that I'm really sorry that's going to be hit. I mean, right now, entertainment, restaurants, tourism, they're feeling the short-term pain, and the ones that get hit hard for it, I feel for them. I mean, I don't know what to say to those people. It's like really not their fault. Sorry. It's a horrible situation, but hopefully those people will minimize the risk, and in a year's time, they will launch their new restaurant, and restaurants will emerge, and concerts will emerge, and it will be a very, very painful 2021, but we will come back. And you know, we were talking about the buffet before, like there will be another breakfast buffet, and I will be
now that's philosophical. There will be another breakfast buffet. I think that I might subtitle this this episode that. That would work really well.
That's perfect.
Yeah. And I hope at some point we can be at that buffet together, or a restaurant, or agricole, and have an actual hug, or an actual cocktail together where we can actually clink glasses. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to a real hug in the future.
I'm glad we had a chat today, and definitely as soon as we can, a hug's coming your way.
Okay. Have a great night and enjoy your dinner.
Thanks, Amie. You too.
Thanks for listening to the 5 Cassette podcast. If you like the show, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Vimeo, Stitcher, or on my blog, multiculturosity.com. I'll be back next week with Colin Buchanan of the Prince Edward Island band Paper Lions. We'll talk about what happens when your band can't tour a new album, the future of the recording industry, and Canadian potatoes. I'm looking forward to that. See you next week.